The glass-walled meeting room on the top floor of the Vance Vineyards building sparkled in the California sun. Below the vineyards stretched out endlessly a green tapestry woven from heritage and millions of dollars. Arthur Vance, the eldest brother with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit, was presenting the quarterly revenue charts. His voice was deep and confident, the voice of a man born knowing he would be in charge. Marcus sat beside him, idly twirling a gold fountain pen while Samuel, the youngest, nodded vigorously, trying to appear engaged. It was a perfect Tuesday afternoon. The sky was cloudless. The numbers on the screen were all positive. Everything was just as the Vance clan wanted it to be. Until it appeared. A small beetle shimmering like a jewel crawled out from a crevice in the massive mahogany table. It was unlike any insect they had ever seen. Its carapace caught the light reflecting the office lamps in strange green glints. Arthur stopped mid-sentence, frowning. "What the hell is that?" Samuel chuckled. "Someone must have left a window open." He reached out to flick it away. But the beetle raised its tiny head, and for an absurd moment all three brothers felt as if it were looking at them. Then another one crawled out, and another. Soon a small river of emerald was flowing across the polished tabletop. They weren't crawling chaotically. They moved with purpose, forming strange patterns, almost like ancient characters. "Call pest control," Marcus snapped, pushing his chair back. But it was too late. From the ceiling vents, from the electrical outlets, from beneath the Persian rug, they swarmed. Hundreds, then thousands. The tiny sound of their legs created a horrifying whispering sound that drowned out the air conditioning. They crawled up the table legs, the chair legs, and began to climb the trouser legs of the three most powerful men in Napa Valley. The sight of a multi-million-dollar boardroom being overrun by an army of beetles in under a minute was unimaginable. It was illogical. It was impossible. All three men screamed a mixture of disgust and terror, trying to brush off the squirming creatures. Arthur fell backward in his chair. Marcus tripped, trying to run for the door, and Samuel just stood frozen, his face pale with horror. Miles away in a small cottage tucked into the hills, Eleanor Vance smiled. She didn't need to be there to see it. She could see it all clear as day in the hazy reflection of an old piece of black glass on her table. She saw the panic in her brother's eyes, the chaos staining their perfect world. And she felt a bitter, malevolent joy spread through her chest. It was a feeling more exquisite than the finest wine they had ever produced. Eleanor was the only daughter among the four Vance children. Her brothers were hard-working men who had turned their father's vast vineyards into an empire. Eleanor grew up alongside them, but always with a difference. Their father, a patriarch, respected throughout the valley, had divided his estate among his sons according to family tradition. Arthur, the eldest, received the majority of the shares and the CEO's chair. Marcus and Samuel also received significant portions and key positions in the company. But Eleanor, as the only daughter, inherited no controlling shares or any land. Her father's will stipulated that she would receive a trust fund on the condition that she marry and live a respectable life. It was assumed that one day she would marry, and her husband would take care of her. Thus, no part of the empire was reserved for her. Not long after their father's death, a new cellar-master came to work at Vance Vineyards. He was handsome, romantic, and from a faraway place. Eleanor, young and curious, met him by chance. They shared fleeting moments in the shadow of promises she perhaps trusted too quickly. A short time later, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. But the cellar-master had vanished without a trace. He had left the valley, taking with him the dreams she had dared to entertain. In Napa, a woman from a prominent family having a child out of wedlock was considered a disgrace. The elderly women of high society had sensed her secret long before she herself realized it. They would glide past her with knowing glances, exchanging whispers and side-eyes, but no one dared to speak to her directly. Her family was still respected, and no one wanted to tarnish the memory of her father. However, Eleanor's mother was not spared the sorrow. She grew thin and frail, carrying the weight of shame and gossip, blaming herself for not raising her daughter well. She looked at her daughter, who once walked with her head held high, now hunched over, her spirit broken. However, when her little granddaughter Amelia was born, she loved her with a gentle and silent love tinged with sadness. But the pain of the situation remained with her, gnawing at her until one quiet evening she passed away, leaving her children and her young granddaughter in the family home. Years passed. Arthur and Marcus married and built magnificent homes on their land. The whole valley celebrated their weddings, and the family's blessings seemed to shine upon them. But Eleanor remained in the family's guest house with Amelia. Although she lived there, she knew the main house was implicitly reserved for Samuel, the unmarried youngest brother. It was an unwritten rule that no one questioned, a tradition deeply ingrained in their family. When the silence of the house became too heavy, Eleanor sought small comforts. She began to bring her lovers into the house when the entire estate was asleep. Quietly and silently, Eleanor one day realized that life was growing inside her again. She was pregnant with another child, one who would be born under her care. But outside the rules, outside the traditions that guided her brothers' lives. Napa's high society began to talk again. Their whispers filled the air, but this time she barely noticed. Her heart had hardened, hidden behind shame, pain, and a sense of injustice. One day Samuel, the youngest, got married, and soon after people began to wonder what that meant for Eleanor. The whispers grew louder, and sometimes at the country club people would stop her with a well-disguised malice to ask, "Eleanor, where will you find a home now Sam is married? This is his house." The words stabbed at her, for Eleanor knew her time in the family home was coming to an end. Where could she go? Her brothers had land houses, places for their families to grow. She had nothing but memories and broken dreams. The bitterness that had been a smoldering ember became a fierce fire, a rage she could no longer contain. Sam's wife, Catherine, moved into the main house, radiant with the pride of a young bride. She rearranged the rooms, redecorated the walls. Eleanor watched it all, her heart tightening. She felt like a stranger in her own space. This once familiar place was now invaded by signs of her exclusion. The fire of hatred in Eleanor's heart was kindled, waiting for the day it would burst into flames and burn everything down. She looked into the black glass, where the image of chaos in her brother's boardroom was fading, and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The incident with the beetles was quickly covered up. Arthur called a top-tier extermination team from San Francisco, who sprayed the entire building and presented a steep bill along with a bland explanation of an unusual seasonal bloom. But none of the three brothers truly believed it. They didn't say it aloud, but a cold unease had crept into their perfectly ordered world. It was like a small crack in a flawless pane of glass, a reminder that everything could shatter. Meanwhile, at the family estate, Catherine Samuel's new bride was trying to make the main house her home. She was a vibrant young woman from a wealthy East Coast family, but hers was new money, lacking the centuries-old history of the Vance clan. She walked the grand hallways with a mix of joy and trepidation. She replaced the old heavy drapes with bright silk, placed fresh peonies on the antique tables, and planned to repaint the dining room a soft buttercup yellow. She wanted to breathe new life into the house to make it reflect her and Samuel's new beginning. Eleanor observed all of this with a deadened silence. Her heart clenched every time she saw a piece of her mother's furniture moved or an ancestral portrait replaced with a modern work of art. She felt like a ghost in her own home, a relic of the past being systematically erased. What was once her familiar space was now invaded by the signs of her exclusion. Eleanor's resentment simmered and her anger manifested in small, calculated acts. When Catherine arranged a beautiful collection of Lalique crystal on the mantelpiece, Eleanor would wait until she left, then quietly rearrange them in a different order. If Catherine chose a white wine for dinner, Eleanor would tell the cook that Samuel actually preferred a Chardonnay from their father's private cellar. She would whisper to herself, "This is still my father's house. She can't act like she's the mistress." But soon the small acts turned into open hostility. Eleanor began to criticize Catherine for everything: her cooking, her management of the staff, even the way she spoke. She did everything to make the young woman feel small, alien in her own home. Being new to the family, Catherine tried to keep the peace. She chose silence over conflict, hoping Eleanor's anger would eventually subside. But on the contrary, Eleanor grew bolder. Months passed, and one morning Samuel decided not to go to the office. He wanted to be with his pregnant wife. He noticed her silence, the way she moved without her usual lightness. As he was trying to ask her what was wrong, he heard Eleanor's voice ring out from the living room. "A woman must know her place in a family," Eleanor shouted in a hard, cold voice. "Do you think you can just sleep until the sun is high? Get up. No one is going to cook for you here, you lazy woman." Catherine rushed out of bed, her face pale, trying to remain calm. But before she could answer, Eleanor pushed the door open, her face contorted with bitterness. Samuel watched the scene, his heart pounding with anger. He stood up, his voice firm. "That's enough, Eleanor." She turned her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected Samuel to be there, but he stared at her with a hardness she had never seen in him. "You can't treat my wife this way," he said. "You're scaring her. She is the mistress of this house now." Eleanor was about to reply, to argue, but Samuel's voice rang out again, even sterner. "There can't be two queens in the same castle, Eleanor. You know that as well as I do. This is my house, and it's time you accepted it." For a moment, silence reigned. Eleanor felt Samuel's words like physical blows. They hit her deeply. This was no longer her space. It was no longer her father's house, but Samuel's, his wife's, and soon their children's. Seeing the pain in his sister's eyes, Samuel added with a hint of compassion, "I'm not going to kick you out with nothing. I'll talk to Arthur and Marcus, and we'll help you find a piece of land to build your own house. In the meantime, you can stay in the guest house out back. But this has to stop now, Eleanor. You must respect my wife in her own home." That night, Eleanor's heart burned with an uncontrollable rage. She lay awake, her mind tormented by anger and shame. Samuel's words echoed in her head. There can't be two queens in the same castle. How could he say such a thing to his own sister? In her mind, she replayed her life in Napa Valley and everything that had been taken from her father's shares, her reputation, her mother, and now even the family home. She clenched her fists, her jaw tight with the feeling that everything that was rightfully hers had been stolen. She felt cast out, dethroned, thrown out of the kingdom she believed she had an equal right to. The fire of hatred was fanned, and she knew with a terrifying certainty that she would burn them all down. After the confrontation, the three Vance brothers felt terribly awkward. They knew deep down that while Eleanor's actions were unacceptable, she truly had nowhere else to go. The thought of their sister living in a cramped guest house unsettled them. After all, family was family. That was sacred. After many long discussions, they decided that Arthur, the eldest, and the one with the most land, would carve out a small plot on the edge of his estate. Together, Arthur, Marcus, and Samuel pooled their money to build a modest house for Eleanor, where she could live with her two daughters, Amelia and the younger Kira. It was a pretty little house not far from the magnificent mansions of her brothers, but it was adequate. They even gathered some furniture, knowing Eleanor would need help starting over. And so Eleanor's new home took shape under the benevolent gaze of her brothers. But Eleanor felt no joy moving in. To her, the house was not a gift, but a cruel reminder of her inferior status. It was a matchbox compared to the palaces her brothers called home. The reality of her life weighed on her heart like a stone. She had no choice. She had to work. Samuel, in a clumsy attempt to be helpful, found her a job managing a small roadside tasting room, a secondary brand the Vance family had acquired years ago. She went there reluctantly, simply to earn a living. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was a servant's job, a task unworthy of someone with the Vance name. All her life she had lived in the family home helping with the household, but had never had to work for money. Now she had to smile at tourists and pour them wine, while her brothers sat in luxurious boardrooms making multi-million-dollar decisions. With each passing day, Eleanor's resentment grew. She watched her brothers prosper, their homes filled with joy and love. Their wives, with their sprawling gardens and successful children, would occasionally invite her to family parties, trying to keep her close to offer her a taste of family warmth. But for Eleanor, These invitations were just cruel reminders of all she did not have. She saw their lives full of abundance, their children laughing carefreely, enjoying the fruits of her own father's land, wearing expensive designer clothes. The contrast was too stark, and every time she entered their homes, the sting of jealousy grew sharper. At night, in the silence of her tiny house, Eleanor's heart grew darker and darker. She now saw her brothers as the source of all her suffering. In her eyes, they were living a glorious life, while she and her daughters struggled with the scraps they had left behind. She began to devise plans to bring them down, to remind them that she was also part of this family, that she was just as worthy as they were. Amelia, her eldest daughter, was now a teenager. Her eyes were wide, her heart receptive to her mother's every word. Eleanor had raised Amelia in the reflection of her own bitterness feeding her, her anger whispering into her ear the grievances she herself had nurtured for years. She would pull her daughter close, whispering venomous words, planting the seeds of hatred in her young heart. "They think they're better than us," Eleanor would whisper in a low, hard voice. "They laugh at us, believing we're inferior. Your uncles only think of themselves and their children. Don't be fooled. They think they're special. They think they're superior to you." Amelia listened in silence, letting the words sink in. She believed every word her mother said, taking them as indisputable truths. So when her cousins came to visit, trying to draw her into their laughter and games, Amelia turned away. Her heart was already hardened by her mother's poison. Years passed, and Eleanor's daughters grew up alongside their cousins. They were all raised almost together, yet separated by an invisible wall of resentment. When it came time for the children to apply to college, Eleanor's heart tightened. All of her brother's children, even those younger than Amelia, excelled in their exams and received acceptance letters from the most prestigious universities: Stanford, Harvard, Yale. The joy that reigned in her brothers' homes was like salt in Eleanor's wound. The laughter, the hugs, and the proud smiles filled the air as the children packed their bags. Meanwhile, Amelia, Eleanor's eldest, received her results with trembling hands. She hadn't scored high enough to get into any of those universities. The news hit Eleanor like a hammer blow. Her daughter, her pride, her reflection had failed where the others had shone. And even when her brothers, in their kindness, offered to pay for Amelia to study for another year, just as they had sent her to the same good private schools as their own children, Eleanor felt profoundly humiliated. Eleanor's jealousy had become a monster. She couldn't bear to see others thrive while she withered in the shadows. One night she slipped quietly out of her house and followed a path that led deep into the desolate hills, where it was rumored that a strange man lived alone, a man who knew ancient secrets the modern world had forgotten. She had heard whispers about him for years, stories of power and dangerous bargains. As Eleanor approached the dilapidated shack, the man emerged as if he had been waiting for her. He was old and thin, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to see into her soul. "I know why you've come, daughter of Vance," he said in a raspy voice. "I want control." Eleanor replied, her voice as cold as ice. "I want to see everything they do, hear their every move, and decide their fate myself." The man looked at her for a long time in silence, reading the hardness in her eyes, the shadows that had slowly taken over her heart over the years. "What you ask," he whispered, "demands a sacrifice. It will require something precious." But Eleanor did not flinch. Her heart had turned to stone. Her mind was entirely focused on destroying her brother's happiness. "Tell me what I have to do," she said in a low, menacing voice. "I'm ready." The man nodded slowly and produced an old wooden box. He opened it and took out 3 objects: a jet-black obsidian stone, a rag doll, and a beetle trapped in a small jar. The beetle was an emerald green, shimmering strangely in the moonlight. "These are vessels of power," he said. "Choose one. With it you will see, you will hear, and you will influence their lives." Eleanor's eyes were fixed on the beetle. Her lips curved into a dark smile. "This one," she said, reaching for the jar. "This will be my weapon." The man's eyes were full of silent warnings. "So be it," he whispered, closing the box. But remember, this spirit needs to be fed. The Beetle King will demand offerings. Every time you summon it, it will take a piece of you little by little. He didn't finish his sentence, but Eleanor didn't care. She was ready to trade anything no matter the cost. She took the jar, feeling its strange cold power spread through her hand. She had her weapon, and soon the entire Vance clan would kneel. Returning home, Eleanor clutched the jar in her hand, feeling its strange cold power spread through her. She waited for dawn, sitting in the silence of her house, her gaze empty, her mind filled with images of her brother's happiness turning to ash. The next day, Eleanor sat in a dark corner, closed her eyes, pressed the jar to her chest, and whispered the words the man in the hills had taught her. A strange energy ran down her spine, and before her mind's eye, the beetle in the jar multiplied into an army. They left her house like a ghostly smoke slithering through the shadows, heading towards the splendid mansions of her brothers. In that moment, Eleanor felt powerful, as if she held the fate of her entire family in the palm of her hand. She smiled with satisfaction. At first she used them sparingly, just to watch, to listen. The emerald beetles became her eyes and ears. They crept under closed doors, hid in flower pots, and listened to the whispered conversations in bedrooms and boardrooms. She learned of Arthur's worries about a grape harvest affected by frost, heard Marcus's arguments with his wife about her overspending, and witnessed Samuel's struggle with the pressures of impending fatherhood. But just observing was not enough. With each passing day, she couldn't resist. She began to interfere. She used the beetles, spying on every detail, listening to every conversation. And each time she used them, a strange heaviness settled in her chest. A coldness seeped slowly into her. The man had warned her, but she hadn't fully understood the extent of the poison she was embracing. Every project she heard about, every happy idea she caught wind of, she destroyed it before it could even begin. When Marcus planned a surprise trip to Europe for his family, Eleanor sent a beetle to nest in his wife's passport, damaging it beyond repair, just before their departure date. When Arthur was about to sign a lucrative contract with a Japanese distributor, Eleanor had the beetles gnaw through important cables in the cellar, ruining an entire batch of precious samples. Small misfortunes plagued her brothers' families, just enough to tarnish their joy, to sow doubt and anxiety. And in the shadows, Eleanor smiled, feeding on their unhappiness. But she didn't see the price she was paying. When the Beetle King demanded blood, the choice was easy for Eleanor. She sacrificed her brother's unborn children. Her sisters-in-law suffered a series of mysterious miscarriages, and doctors could find no cause. When there were no more fetuses in the family to offer, she sacrificed a child from the town, a tragic drowning accident at a pool party that no one could explain. With Amelia, her eldest, always by her side, she extended her hatred to the entire valley. Now, if someone seemed to be succeeding, if she felt even a hint of jealousy, she would send her beetles. The beetles slithered under doors, entered through cracks in the walls, hid under beds, watching every move, listening to every whisper. In some houses, they caused chaos. Important documents disappeared. Precious family heirlooms were found soiled. Eleanor and Amelia delighted in the stories of strange phenomena that spread through Napa. Gradually, they grew more confident, more creative in their actions. One evening, Amelia discovered a new trick. While spying on a cousin, Arthur's son, who was studying late, the beetle landed just above the boy's desk. The next day, Amelia proudly told her mother how the beetle had been able to transmit to her everything her cousin had written, every answer he had memorized, every word. "It was like I was studying with him," she whispered excitedly. Eleanor's face lit up with pride. "This is even better than I had hoped," she whispered, a wicked glint in her eyes. "We will take from them their knowledge, their success. Let them struggle while we rise." From that day on, Amelia never studied alone again. The beetles followed her cousins and even some of her classmates, silently gathering their homework, their answers, and all their efforts. When exams came, the beetles transmitted the correct answers to her, and she passed with flying colors. Her mother was immensely pleased. Finally, her daughter was achieving everything she had ever dreamed of, and it was built on the failures of those she envied most. At the end of the year, Amelia's results earned her multiple scholarships. She now had her pick of prestigious universities. Meanwhile, her cousin, the brilliant student who had once been the pride of the Vance family, was stunned by his unbelievable exam results. His family was in shock. His parents, heartbroken, couldn't understand how their son, once a model student, could have failed so miserably. So when Amelia's results were announced, her uncles, ever benevolent and proud, threw a big party. They invited family and friends to Arthur's mansion to celebrate, rejoicing in their niece's success. For Eleanor, it wasn't just a party. It was a victory. She had waited for this moment for so long to see in her brother's eyes what she had felt for years: anxiety, uncertainty, the fear of failure. Her uncles raised their glasses to Amelia's bright future, toasting her scholarships and her success. But Eleanor, sitting in a corner, remained silent. A thin, triumphant smile played on her lips. She watched, listening to the low voices of her brothers talking about their struggling business. Their faces were grim. The harvest had failed again. The market was no longer in their favor. Their wives had started cutting back, finding ways to save on food, clothes, and especially to continue paying school fees. One of them, Arthur, even mentioned having sold a piece of his land to pay off debts. Eleanor listened, thanks to the beetles, her heart swelling with a dark joy. Finally, they were suffering. Finally, they were feeling the sense of loss, helplessness, of being small. Her daughters would have everything she had ever wanted, and her brothers, they would learn what it meant to be dispossessed, forgotten, diminished. Years of unexplained misfortunes had fallen upon Napa Valley, and a simmering atmosphere of fear had begun to creep into the luxurious homes. One morning, Catherine, Samuel's wife, went to visit Marcus's wife. After a few pleasantries, she went to the kitchen for a glass of water. But when she opened a cupboard, she froze. A scream caught in her throat. Beetles, dozens of them swarming in the darkness. "Sister," she exclaimed, "you have them too. I've seen them at my house, but never so many. Never like this. It's horrible." Marcus's wife shook her head, her face pale. She whispered, her voice trembling, that they had tried everything. Insect sprays, professional exterminators. The beetles always came back. Catherine sighed, her eyes worried. "Sister, after everything we've been through, don't you think it's time we sought spiritual help? We can't turn a blind eye anymore." Marcus's wife nodded, her heart heavy. She had known this truth for a long time, but she had been too afraid to face it. "You're right," she whispered. "Something dark has taken hold among us, and it's not natural." Not long after, the three sisters-in-law went together to see a famous psychic in San Francisco, a woman said to be able to see the invisible. With her eyes closed, in a low voice, the psychic called upon hidden forces trying to pierce the veil of darkness. Finally, she spoke. "The darkness comes from within your own family." Their eyes widened, revealing a devastating truth. The three women sat in silence, their hearts broken by this betrayal. Returning home, they shared the news with each other, and it was Catherine, the youngest, and the one with the strongest faith, who spoke. "We can't fight her with the same darkness she used. That would only bind us to her evil. We must turn to the light, to prayer, for only light can set us free." And so Catherine began to pray. Softly at first, but her voice grew stronger, filled with a deep faith. She prayed for deliverance, for protection, and for the strength to break the curse. Meanwhile, Eleanor was savoring her victory. She had everything she had ever wanted. Amelia had graduated with honors and had an interview for an important position at a prestigious law firm in a week. Her brothers were at their lowest, and for the first time she felt she was above them. That day, Kira, Eleanor's youngest daughter, was cleaning her mother's room. She was a gentle child with a pure heart whom Eleanor often ignored. As she was cleaning a top shelf, she accidentally knocked over an old glass jar that had been placed there long ago. The jar shattered on the floor. As Kira bent down to pick up the pieces, a giant beetle crawled out, its body glowing strangely. Thinking it was just another pest, Kira decisively crushed it with her foot. She, without knowing it, had just killed the Beetle King, the heart of Eleanor's magic, the source of her power. the very thing that had a mystical link to Amelia's success and Eleanor's power. Instantly, a horrific shockwave ran through Eleanor's body. She let out a choked scream as a burning pain of incredible intensity erupted in her chest and spread rapidly through her body. It felt as though flames were consuming her from the inside, clawing at her soul. Eleanor staggered, clutching her pounding chest, as an invisible force seized her with merciless brutality. She felt as if she were being stripped bare. Every misdeed was exposed, her soul laid open like a cursed book. In Samuel's mansion, where Catherine was praying ceaselessly, the beetles Eleanor had sent began to crawl out of every crevice, every corner. They fled the house, the rooms, as if the light was scorching them. A scream of agony tore from Eleanor's throat. She felt her power slipping away, her grip on Amelia, on everything dissolving. "No, not like this, I had it all," she shrieked, clawing at the floor, desperately trying to hold on to what was left. Her voice was now a jumble of rage and despair, a final confession. "Forgive me," she screamed to no one in particular, her voice breaking. "It was me. It was I who sent the beetles, the curses, the miscarriages. I wanted them to suffer as I have." By now, the entire Vance family had gathered at her door, drawn by her screams. Their faces were frozen in shock, betrayal, and disgust. One by one, her relatives understood. Eleanor was the source of all their misfortune. She had poisoned their lives with her jealousy, destroyed her own bloodline for a twisted revenge. Her confession hung in the air, cold and bitter. Her brothers, who had once loved her so much, couldn't look her in the eye. She was no longer their sister, but a ghost, a monster. Yet they couldn't abandon her. She was still their blood after all. They surrounded her, trying to protect her from her own madness. "Eleanor, stop! What's happened?" Arthur cried. But Eleanor no longer heard anything. She was lost in her own hell, consumed by the fire she herself had started. She collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing, and then she was still. Her heart, so heavy with hatred, had finally stopped beating. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal, but nothing was ever the same again. Amelia failed interview after interview. Eleanor's teachings had marked her too deeply. A poison still lingered in her. Resentment simmered within her against her uncles, against the cousin whose results she had stolen and who was now shining in his career. Her pride wounded Amelia refused all help. She sank so low that she sold her body to survive rather than accept any support. Her sister Kira, though innocent and gentle, suffered just as much. The family name was forever stained. Although the curse had vanished with Eleanor, people's gazes still weighed heavily on the two daughters, and their uncles, though they tried to forgive, could never look at Kira the same way again. The whole valley whispered, fearing that the two girls had inherited Eleanor's dark legacy. Fear hung in the air. No one dared to get close to them, for in the eyes of the two sisters, people could still see the shadow of Eleanor's sin. When pain is not healed, it becomes a weapon against the innocent. The fire of revenge always ends up consuming the one who lit it. What you sow in anger, you will reap in tears.